Why do you press play on something you have already seen? Not once, not twice. For the 4th time, maybe the 5th, you know every scene, you know the dialogue before it happens. You could probably describe the next shot with your eyes closed. And yet the brain chooses this over something new, over something it has never experienced, over an entire library of unwatched content sitting one click away. That seems like it should not make sense. A brain built for learning, for novelty, for pattern recognition, voluntarily choosing repetition. But what if the repetition is not the bug? What if it is the function? In the last video, we looked at why the brain prefers home, how cortical arousal and the acetylcholine pathway explain the pull towards quiet. Today, the mechanism is different, but the logic is the same. The brain is not being lazy, it is solving a specific problem. And the problem is this: the world is unpredictable. Every new piece of content, a new show, a new film, a new story is a prediction task. The brain has to build a model from scratch. Who are these characters? What are the rules of this world? Where is the narrative going? What should the emotional investment be? This is expensive. Not emotionally expensive, computationally expensive. The prefrontal cortex is running simulations. The amygdala is on alert for emotional surprises. The dopamine system is allocating attention resources based on constantly updated predictions. A new show is, neurologically, a workload. Now here is where it gets interesting. There is a framework in neuroscience called predictive coding. Carl Friston, one of the most cited neuroscientists alive, formalized this idea over decades of work at University College London. The core principle: the brain does not passively receive the world. It actively predicts the world, moment by moment, and then compares those predictions against what actually happens. When the prediction is wrong, when something unexpected occurs, the brain generates what is called a prediction error. That error signal triggers a cascade. Attention shifts, resources reallocate, the amygdala assesses threat level, the prefrontal cortex updates its model. This is useful. This is how learning works. But it's also expensive. Every prediction error costs energy. Every surprise demands processing. Now consider what happens when the prediction matches reality, when you know what comes next and it comes exactly as expected. The brain generates a very different signal. Not excitement, not surprise, something closer to relief. Prediction error of 0. The system got it right. No correction needed, no reallocation of resources, no threat assessment, just smooth, confirmed, low-cost flow, the neural equivalent of exhaling. And this is where rewatching stops looking like laziness and starts looking like engineering. When you watch a show for the 4th time, the brain is not learning, it is confirming. Every scene, every line, every beat of the story predicted and confirmed. The prediction error drops to near 0 for the entire runtime. And what happens when prediction error drops? Cortisol drops, cognitive load drops. The default mode network, the same internal processing system we talked about in the last video, gets more room to breathe. It can run its background operations, self-reflection, memory consolidation, emotional processing, without competing with the demands of new narrative input. Researchers at the University of Buffalo found in 2012 that people who engaged with familiar fictional narratives showed measurably lower stress markers compared to those engaging with new content of similar quality. Same amount of screen time, same genre, same general level of engagement. But the familiar group recovered faster. The rewatch was not entertainment, it was regulation. The brain was using narrative predictability as a cortisol management tool. But here is the part that makes this more than just brain trivia. Because there is a second mechanism running underneath the first: nostalgia. Most people think of nostalgia as an emotion, a warm, slightly embarrassed feeling about the past, something soft and imprecise. But neuroscience has a more precise definition. Nostalgia is a self-regulatory mechanism. It is not a side effect of memory, it is a function. Wildschut and colleagues demonstrated in 2006 that inducing nostalgia in controlled settings counteracts loneliness, reduces anxiety, and increases a sense of social connectedness, even when experienced completely alone. The effect was not just subjective, it showed up in measurable physiological markers. When you rewatch a show you loved at 22, you're not just re-experiencing the story, You're reactivating the neural pathways associated with who you were when you first watched it. The friendships of that era, the apartment with the bad lighting, the Friday evenings that felt infinite, the particular quality of possibility that comes with being that age. The brain is not replaying a show, it is replaying a version of yourself, and that replay is not indulgent. It is stabilizing. It anchors the present self to a continuous identity narrative, a felt sense that you are still the same person across time even when everything external has changed. For a brain under stress, that continuity is not a luxury, it is load-bearing infrastructure. So the obvious conclusion writes itself. Rewatching is healthy, it is regulation, it is smart neurological housekeeping. The brain knows what it is doing. Except that is where most channels stop, and that is where the interesting part actually begins, because here is the paradox. Everything described so far is true. Predictive coding works. Cortisol reduction is measurable. Nostalgia stabilizes identity. But none of that tells you whether this specific rewatch on this specific evening is regulation, or whether it is something else. Whether the brain is choosing the familiar because it needs recovery, or because the unfamiliar has become threatening. There is a version of rewatching that is a nervous system restoring itself after a demanding day. And there is a version where pressing play on the same show is a way of never having to feel the discomfort of not knowing what happens next, in the show and in life. Same remote, same couch, same screen, different mechanism underneath. And this is the reframe. The question is not whether rewatching is good or bad. That is a binary, and binaries are almost always wrong when it comes to the brain. The better question is, what is driving this specific choice right now? If you had a stressful day and your nervous system needs a prediction error-free zone to recover, the rewatch is doing exactly what it should. Acetylcholine pathway, default mode network, cortisol reduction, the full circuit working as designed. But if the last time you started something new was weeks ago, and the thought of not knowing what happens next produces a faint but real anxiety, that is different information. Not a verdict, just data. A signal that the line between comfort and avoidance has started to blur, and it might be worth noticing where it sits. So here is the new frame. Rewatching is not regression, it is not laziness, it is not a failure of curiosity, it is a neurological strategy, predictive coding plus cortisol regulation plus nostalgic self-continuity. Your brain is running a recovery protocol using familiar narrative structure as its raw material. That is real, measurable, and legitimate. But a strategy is only healthy as long as it remains a choice, one option among several. The moment it becomes the only choice, the moment the new feels not just unappealing but impossible, the moment pressing play on something unfamiliar produces a quiet dread instead of neutral indifference. The mechanism has shifted from regulation to avoidance, and the difference between the two is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost invisible, which is exactly why it is worth noticing. On Friday, we will look at people who took a different kind of step back, not from new shows, but from social media entirely. And the dopamine story there is stranger than you might expect.